This is 40K Today. 40K news so impressive, in its stat line under wounds, it says no.
Hello and welcome to a special Best of 40K Today. We are your daily dose of 40K news and we feature content creators from across the globe. We love 40K and know you do too. Today we bring you a selection of our favorite interviews from this week. We have to say a massive thanks to our friends at Frontline Gaming for having us in on a Saturday. If you like what you hear, give us a listen during the week at 40ktoday.com, or you can find us via your favorite podcast player. I'm your host, John Damaris, and today on the program, we talk to Dan Salmons about Salamanders in the new edition. This week's Woman in Warhammer loves all things chaos. Salty John gets super salty about win-at-all-cost players, and we get a meta update from the Falcon. In this week's Faction Focus, winner of the Flying Monkey Major, Dan Salmon, swings by to talk about some of the best things Salamanders bring to the table in 9th edition. All right, everyone, welcome back. And today we're going to talk with Dan Salmons, who recently won the first major in 9th edition, I think, or one of the first anyway, the Flying Monkey. And Dan won with Salamanders. So he's going to tell us in our Faction Focus today what's great about the Sallies. So Dan, take it away.
So just a few things about the Salamanders. Probably one of the best things about them is they have some of the best stratagems that Space Marines have access to. You have an on-demand +1 to wound. Their flamers can do mortal wounds. You can count as stationary for your heavy weapons. So when your grav devs come in, you can use that stratagem to count as stationary, get +1 to wound on them, and use the grav amp. So they just are the best grav devs that Space Marines have access to.
Count as stationary also works really good on aggressors. So.
Oh yes, so the next, they've got with the new strategic reserves, and if you do successors like I did and give them +3 inches of their range and have 11-inch flamers coming on from the side of the board with some aggressors, and being able to count as not moving and then double shooting them is incredibly strong, and it's a lot of fun because you get to roll a ton of dice and just auto hitting with +1 to wound for the super doctrine on turns 2 and turn 3 for all their flamer and melta weapons is turns their flamers into a kind of a universal tool for killing tanks or killing infantry.
Let's talk about that for a second. So you played something really unique. You played a 3-man flamer aggressor unit and a sergeant with a master crafted flamer, I guess. I don't know what it's like, a Boltstorm flamer or something. Not a Boltstorm, but a Flamestorm gauntlet or something. I don't remember. But why don't you go through the math on how much damage that thing does?
Yeah, so if it's 1 CP for a strat, and you can give a sergeant a master crafted weapon. I think the Salamander version is called Master Artisans, actually. So you pop that on your guy, your aggressor sergeant, bring him on from strategic reserves. Let's say there's a toughness 7 3-up save tank there. On average, so depending on, it really comes down to what you need, but if you want to do maximum efficiency, you can spend the CP to count as stationary, so you can shoot twice, and then you can spend 2 CP to maximize the shots. So that single guy will put out 24 strength 4 AP 1 with +1 to wound 2 damage shots, which when you run the math on it is enough to one shot a vehicle that's T7 12 wounds with a 3-up save, and then the other 2 guys in his squad can shoot at another vehicle and do the same. So, and that unit is 120 points. So that guy for me over the weekend, somewhere in the vicinity, and not including his friends with him, but that single guy with help from some stratagems and stuff, probably was responsible for killing about 1,500 points of my opponent's armies throughout the 6 games. So
yeah, basically that 120 point unit. I mean, that's what it does to vehicles, and it just absolutely obliterates troops, right? So Yep. It's just sort of 6 of one, half a dozen the other. You just kill whatever you want, which is not a bad thing, especially for like such a small footprint 3-man unit. It's pretty cool.
Before the tournament, we were kind of wondering, is anyone going to show up with the hordes and go that way with the meta? But at least taking this type of Salamanders army, I just said, well, if somebody shows up with hordes, I have the answer, or if somebody shows up with vehicle spam, I've got that answer too. It's just the same thing. So
yeah, I think another fun part about Salamanders is because we talked about that Master Artisan reroll, and then they get the +1 to wound with Melta. They have the best Eradicators, which are already super efficient, right?
Yeah, coming on and getting the shoot twice. So the way Master Artisans works, you get to shoot their first 3 shots and get a reroll hit and a reroll wound. And then you shoot again, and it's every time they shoot, you can trigger Master Artisan. So they shoot the second 3 shots and get a reroll hit and reroll wound. And yes, the +1 to wound. So I mean, there's most things I shot at weren't toughness 8. So against toughness 7 stuff, you hit on 3s with a reroll, and then you wound on 2s with a reroll at AP 5, I think, on turn 2 and turn 3. So it's extremely brutal and extremely effective at putting the damage on your opponents.
We like to say in the business that'll leave a mark, right?
Oh yes. So
especially if you're in melter range, right? Rerolling those damage rolls. So
yeah, and it's actually, so the long range marksman being upset to a 13.5 inches, so it helps it a little bit, and does come into play occasionally where you're getting zoned out a little bit to be able to still get the meltas in there.
Okay, so before I let you go, what tip would you give people for playing against salamanders? Because I think we're going to see some of them out there.
So, defensively, salamanders don't really have too much. They can be a little hard to kill against 1 damage weapons, but multi-damage or higher AP things, they are, for all intents and purposes, they are just normal Marines walking around without any special protection. So while they can hit like a freight train, they don't take a punch that well. So, this is if you have the ability to screen out, your flanks and keep their strategic reserves from getting into your juicy center or getting onto things they want to get on, it will go a long way. And then, as much as it pains me to say, there is the flamer aggressors can only threat 17 inches from the board edge. So if you're 17.1 inches away, just stand there and wave at them as they come on and do nothing. So there's ways to play, and it might slow you down, it might limit you from getting some early points, but do what you can to stop them from getting points, and it'll play out well for you in the long run, probably.
Yeah, it sounds like you need to play with blunting their beta strike in mind, and I think it'll help you in the game. Still going to be a tough matchup because they're very efficient and they are Space Marines, which are really good right now. So, yeah.
Agreed. So
all right, thanks.
That's no problem.
Yeah, I was going to say thanks very much. I think those are great tips, and I'm sure we'll see you at the top of the podium in several more tournaments this year.
Yep, sounds good.
Say it with me, everyone. Flamers and Meltas, oh my. One of our favorite segments every week is our Woman in Warhammer, where we feature women who are enjoying the hobby. This week, Kylie stops by to tell us all about her love for all things Nurgly. Is that a word? I'm pretty sure Nurgly's a word.
I'm here for another Women in Warhammer feature, and I'm here with Kylie. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
And I found you on Instagram, and then when I found out that you also play in ITC tournaments, I was like, we have to get her on the show. So we always sort of start off with the same question. So how did you get started in the hobby?
I started through my boyfriend.
Yep.
I had no idea about the hobby beforehand, and we had been dating for a couple weeks, and he showed me his corner, and I was just completely astonished and amazed and also inspired. For our first couple years of dating, I kind of let him have his thing, and I didn't want to intrude in it, and I didn't want to change it for him, so I just kind of let it be. But every time we moved into a new apartment, I made sure that that was his hobby space. And then a couple years later, he showed me 7th edition, and we played a couple games, and I wasn't quite convinced on it. The mechanics of the game was a little weird, and it was just Chaos Space Marine, so I wasn't emotionally connected to it.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward a couple years, and he was working in his hobby room, and I come across, and he's working on some Nurglings, and I was like, "Oh, those are super cute. What are they?" And he's like, "It's Nurglings." And he's like, "Do you want to paint a couple?" I was like, "Sure." And I was like, "What is this for?" And he's like, "It's for Warhammer." And I was like, "Wait, they're not all Space Marines and orcs?" And he's like, "No, this is for the faction Nurgle." I'm like, "Oh, this is kind of cool." And I painted a couple, and from there it blossomed into the love for Nurgle, and I loved it ever since.
I love that you just used the word blossomed for Nurgle because of Nurgle's garden. I love it.
Yeah.
So we know that you like Nurgle.
Mhm.
is there anything in particular about the faction, either the way that it plays or the lore, anything like what really makes you gravitated towards Nurgle?
100% everything about it. I enjoyed the fact that they're in the grim, dark future. There could still be creatures with a smile on their face. And more, my boyfriend was telling me the lore and the stories of Nurgle between the cycle of life and death and the garden and Mortarian's very sad story. And I just empathized with it. And this was my faction for me.
I
I
love it.
embodied Nurgle.
I love it when I hear about people who just like love their faction.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So you've played a few games in ninth.
Mhm.
How have you liked the new edition?
I love it. I didn't realize I was building a ninth edition army in 8th edition.
I feel that way too, actually.
Mhm.
Strangely enough. Yeah. What factions have you played against in ninth? Have you found that there's any like boogeyman lists?
I just played Ravenguard and I just lost to them, and that was very scary, but that was just a lot of shots, a lot. I played quite poorly. I was quite nervous. He is from Europe and he's played in a lot of tournaments, so I think that my nerves caught up to me with that. But I've played Sisters, I've played Necrons, and I've played Alpha Legion. I've also played Khorne. And since ninth is more objective secured, and the points are more on holding objectives, it's been really great with Nurgle demons because they like to be resilient. So they like to stay on the table.
Yeah, and my army is the complete opposite. I have no resiliency whatsoever. So I'm tweaking my list, but I have an idea of where I want to go with that.
It's a constant tweak system. You gotta, like, fine-tune it, like, I'm
Yeah.
constantly back to the drawing board, like, "Okay, that didn't quite work there, so I'll change it a little bit up there." My boyfriend keeps telling me to, like, "Don't change your army list," but I kinda want to and just play around, tweak it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, my coach is also like that, like play the same list but make minor tweaks
Mhm,
to it
right.
along the way. So in general, like the core, I'll have like 1,500 points that stay the same, and then I'll sort of
Mhm,
swap things out in that like last 500 points to kind of see where I want to go with it. So,
mhm.
so you're sort of still playing the same list. It's
Yep.
just slight differences.
Mhm, and since Engine Wars came out,
Mhm.
and I've been playing with Exalted Greater Demon, the Great and Clean ones, they've been so
Mhm.
much fun, randomly rolling and then like, "Oh, I get a disgusting resilience of 4 or they're tough 8." It's like, "Okay, they're
Oh.
monsters now. Okay, sweet."
Oh.
They're essentially
Uh,
knights, I guess, on the table, so that's fun,
Yeah. So the ITC season is a little bit of a wash this year.
right?
Do you have any plans of like doing any big events or anything like that?
Considering where I live, there's nothing going on. So probably for the rest of the season, not. But lots of practice, lots of playing with people, honing my skills, and then definitely for next season, if especially with the COVID restrictions get a little bit lifted and a lot more comfortable, I would love to travel the country and play in other majors around, well, there
Yeah,
probably won't be majors, but at least other tournaments.
yeah. I know we were talking about meeting up at Wet Coast, and
Right?
I wasn't gonna make it to that one, and then they
Oh,
canceled it anyway. But maybe next year.
I hope so.
Yeah, maybe next year. Anyway, it's been so great having you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure.
That was Kaylee, and it sounds like she's having a lot of fun. Welcome back. Salty John and I sit down for a good old rant session about the win at all cost players and how we think everyone should approach the game. All right, 40K Today fans, we have a little special treat today. We've got Salty John back on the show where he actually might be a little bit salty, which I'm excited for. John, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
I'm very happy to have you back. So you recently wrote an article, and I'm assuming it went up on Frontline Gaming, about rules interactions and sort of like how you should approach the game. Do you want to talk a little bit about what the premise of the article was, and then we'll get into it?
Yeah, sure. So the basic premise was the idea that like players have a certain amount of responsibility for how they play the game. Like if you were somebody who plays the game consistently in the gray area of the rules, attempting to use that to your advantage, that's on you. And that players also have like responsibility for making sure that the game is being played with fidelity. It's not all just, well, this tournament organizer or this judge said whatever. Like a lot of it is if you are actively going into a situation hoping to use a specific rules interaction in a way that you know is not necessarily accurate, you have to own that. Like that's who you are, that's how you're choosing to play. And we as a community should not encourage that type of behavior when it comes to competitive 40K. That was it. And I posted it, and then I got a bit of traction on a couple of places, and some people were really upset that about the idea of it being on the player and not the judges necessarily.
Oh no,
to curb that type of behavior.
It's 100% on the player, and let me explain why. We're playing a miniatures game, and what I mean by that specifically is this. It requires a social contract to keep the game clean. It is so easy to bump models. It is so easy to move models, mismeasure. I mean, there is 1,000,001 ways where you could do microaggressive cheating if you wanted to, and you were that guy. You can get away with it. You 100% do, and there's people that do because all they care about is winning, right? That definitely happened.
Yep. Now,
the good news is the players at the top level of the game, your Nick Nanavati's, the people like that, they will absolutely shut that down. Your Richard Sieglers, they don't want anything. They don't want any part of that. They want to beat you in what I would call a beautiful game, right? They want to beat you because their strategy, their tactics were better than your strategy and your tactics. They don't want to win because they had better dice. They don't want to win because they found some loophole in the rules and caught you off guard that you had no idea that that's how that worked. They want to beat you in the game, right? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. There was somebody who made a comment somewhere about one time they watched a game Richard Siegler was playing at a tournament that was being streamed, and he gave so many takebacks to his opponent that it was almost like watching Richard Siegler play himself.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the kind of way he plays, and that's the way the game shouldn't be gotcha moments, which we've kind of gotten away from, thankfully, but it also shouldn't be like, I'm going to go into this event with this idea in mind that I'm going to bid once I'm there to be allowed to do this thing.
Yeah. I mean, think about it, right? Do you want to be Belichick? Are you Bill Belichick? Are you going to do everything you can under your power to win? We don't get paid millions of dollars. We don't get paid hundreds of dollars to win this game. So
some people don't even get paid tens of dollars.
That's the point. There's no money in it. So it really becomes like, sure, there's some accolade, right? And there's some F-list notoriety, I guess. But dude, if you're playing the game for those reasons, you're doing it for the wrong reasons, man. The game is actually encapsulated by an amazing community that you get to engage with, full of sweet, sweet people. And that's what it should be about. You want to go compete and win? I'm all for it. Like, I like to compete too, don't get me wrong. But if you're trying to win just by, being that guy, and you might think, oh, I'm not being that guy, I'm just playing by the letter of the law. Well, no, you're trying to gain an advantage by doing something that in your heart of hearts is not intended, or probably not intended, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I definitely see where some people are coming from in terms of like raw versus rules is intended, because there are times where, and it's a subjective thing. Like there are times where you look at something, you're like, well, that is the rule as is written, so that's the way it's supposed to be. There's other times where you look at the rule as written and that's not necessarily what's intended. So I understand people are like, you have to play raw. And there are times as a judge where I'm like, well, we go with what it says. But that's because it makes common sense for it to be played the way it's stated. There are times where you read something in an interaction, or somebody has, 8 different FAQs open because they're trying to weave their thread of this is legal because of all these things. And you're looking at it and you're going, I understand the writing, but it feels like it's incorrect based on the other rules and the way they work. Like the intention is clearly not for you to be able to do this weird interaction. And the fact that you have to pull out 8 different FAQs to prove your point, just the idea that we're talking about proving point means that there's something inherently against the spirit of the game that you're trying to pull. And the spirit of the game should be what drives players in general. And like you're saying, we're talking about a game, and you're supposed to be for fun. It's supposed to be an interaction. It's something I do with my buddies. And even if you're playing it competitively, you shouldn't be going against the spirit of the game just to try to win the game. Like, yes, the game is about winning, but winning at all costs, in terms of win at all costs, in terms of cheating or in terms of even bending the rules to your favor, it's just not where we should be at as a community.
I agree 100%. Thank you so much for writing the article. Sorry if I got a little salty, but it's one of my hot button issues. The thing is, for me, and this is, just one man's opinion, but there is a social contract when you're playing a miniatures game, because to keep the game state clean, like, it requires both players, and you got to help each other out to make the game a good game. And if one person isn't a good actor in that, it becomes a crap show in a hurry. So, which is why, by and large, 99% of the people you play will be a good guy and make the game a good game, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. I agree that the vast majority of people aren't bad actors in this. They're somebody who legitimately just wants to play a good game with you. And I think that there's a very vocal minority of people who want to be allowed to pick apart these things and live in this gray area. And there's an even smaller group of people who then actively go out and try to use these things and cause a bad time for people. And it's just not okay to be that kind of a person who's going to cause bad games for people just because you are so insistent on winning that you're going to ruin everybody's good time with your weird rules interaction.
All right, John, I think that's well said. Thanks for your time.
You're welcome.
I want to take a second to stress to everyone that the community is filled with amazing people. Come on out to an event and hang out once COVID is done and see for yourself. I promise you, those win-at-all-cost players, they're very few and far between. The 9th edition meta is very young and just starting to bud. Peter the Falcon stops by to give us a rundown on how the stats are starting to shape up. Caw-caw! I've always wanted to do that.
Oh, man.
Welcome, Peter the Falcon, back to 40K Today. It's been too long, buddy. We've missed you so much.
Well, thanks. I've missed you guys, particularly you. You're probably the second most handsome person in 40K.
All right, let's talk about some 40K. So we've now had a few events, enough events to where you might see some trends. I mean, nothing we can count on for sure, because the statistical pool is not deep.
No, not at all. But we're starting to see some trends, like you said. Yeah, there've been 3 GTs, a major now, multiple almost GTs, 5-round events that due to COVID restrictions are playing at 20 to 25 players, and there've been a lot of RTTs. We've even had TTS results, Tabletop Simulator. So we've got enough data, if you want to dig into it, that you can start to make some early conclusions on where the meta currently is. But as you kind of alluded to, it's still early and it can change very abruptly because there's so few games. It's hard to know when the meta is actually settled.
Oh, people are learning how to play 9th edition too.
Exactly. So that's big. That's real big.
There's a lot of what we'll call it undiscovered country, where things that are good now might not be good in the meta 3 months from now because people have figured out 9th edition.
Exactly.
Right?
And it's something that's very unique now, because with 8th edition, and without COVID, we had 8 GTs a week. So it was the meta adjusted so fast. It only took maybe 2 weeks tops after a new book or an FAQ came out before you could kind of see the meta has already kind of resolved itself again, with the occasional exception. Now, every week we're seeing in these very small events, something new pop up that's a little exciting. Maybe there's some hope for certain things. It's really, I like it. I think it's great. There's a part of me that hates it because I love having the statistics and being able to say, here's the firm results, but I also enjoy not knowing. I love going into games that I'm watching now and being I don't know if these guys are going to win or not. I think this army's pretty bad right now. And then they surprise me and I love that.
Yeah, actually, I love that too. It kind of reminds me back in the day when I first started playing Magic the Gathering. It was in 1993, and there was no internet really. I mean, the internet existed, but it was like
I mean, it took about
not
45 minutes to download a JPEG. So yeah,
right. But one of the great things was in that time period, nobody knew anything. So it was the discovery was playing the game
Yeah.
as opposed to doing the research online. And there's something that's really, really fun about that. And this isn't quite that. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there is still information online. It gets disseminated very quickly. But because of COVID, the pace at which it's discovered has been slowed down, is like what I think you were alluding to.
Yeah, dramatically.
It makes the exploration more fun for the rest of us because we don't just look at it online. We actually get to participate in it and draw our own conclusions and sort of enjoy that journey. So I'm super excited about that.
Yep. No, it's great. I love it. I love seeing new things pop up. There's so many more people that I'm leaning on and listening to than I would have done near the end of 8th, when you could rely on certain people to know where things were headed. Now Joe Schmo comes out with a list and you have to say, well, maybe that is how you're supposed to play 9th edition now, because no one maybe really knows yet. So
okay, well, so that being said, what are you seeing? What is the data saying? I've got to think that Salamanders have to be up there pretty good, because I've seen results where they've won quite a few events.
So Salamanders are definitely in the top echelon. Even if you just go from a T-Whip or a like a top level win perspective, Alex Harrison won the Vanguard Super Series. He also won 2 RTTs and a almost GT over the weekend in the UK. It was 26 players, I believe. 5 games, all with Salamanders, all with like slight tweaks on that same list. And then we also had the Flying Monkey Major happen over the weekend, which was the top table was 2 Salamander players. They were the only 2 players to be 5-0 heading into the 6th round. David Villarreal and Dan Salmons. Very similar lists, and not exactly the same, but they took a lot of the same pieces. Just how they played them were differently. David went with core Salamanders, where Dan went with a successor chapter to get that extra 3-inch range on all his flamers. So we got to see that in action. It's a very brutal list because the smaller board size makes it very easy for it to take up space very quickly. It makes a lot of use out of reserves. Very powerful. So they're sitting in the mid 60s for win rate right now, which is very high. Generally, you don't want to see anything higher than the kind of low to mid 50s. That being said, it's early. Who knows, if something will bring it down. White Scars also making a lot of big showings from the Space Marine faction as well, which we've been hearing a lot of from top tier players. They haven't won anything yet, but a lot of 4-1s, 5-1s coming out of White Scars as well.
Very cool. So I saw that there was some sort of unexpected actors that have sort of peeked up their head. And I use actors intentionally because Harlequins have been doing very well, right?
Harlequins have been doing fantastic. So there was a 1,750 point event. I believe you guys talked to him. Matthew Bodnarchuk won the Boardroom Brawl with Harlequins. Colin McDade went 5-1 with Harlequins at the Flying Monkey as well. We also saw Harlequins make it to the final of the Tactical Tortoise Invitational, losing to Space Wolves, another army that has not seen the light of day in a while. Space Wolves actually won that whole tournament. But yes, Harlequins, Frozen Stars with lots of troops, generally running fusion pistols, generally a few of the boats so they can get around a little quicker and have a little protection. Doing a lot of work. Once again, an army that likes to kind of get in that mid-range and then get into close combat right afterwards. Very fast. And durable enough now where you're not going to table them on turn 6, which used to be a big problem with Harlequins, was they gassed out before the end of the game. Now with a 1 round less, it's a little easier for them to stay on the board. They do have a couple struggles, as was if you watch the tabletop the game, that finals game for the Tactical Tortoise Invitational. Anything that can make them fight last really hurts their chances in a lot of matchups. So that's really cool. And then Orcs are another big one that are, well, they're win percentages and everything aren't where you'd kind of like them to be. They're playing exactly like I saw a lot in 8th, where they have a lot of guys on the low end, and then there's like 3 or 4 people that are ultra carrying them on the top end. We had the Warzone Gigabytes event that saw 2 Orc players in the top 3. The Adelaide GT in Australia had a win for Orcs. So while their win rates are really low, we're seeing, really good showing, particularly out of buggy lists out of Orcs. We'll have to see if the FAQ changes that, where they lost the War Boss on Biker. But yeah, we're starting to see this trend where Space Marines are doing very well, as I think everyone expected. They didn't lose a lot coming into this edition. They're only getting better. Harlequin's doing fantastic, which is great for them. The only other faction I haven't brought up is, and I'm sorry for not letting you talk, but I'm just so excited about talking about the game. Go. Adeptus Custodes. A lot of people featured them as like a top tier army coming into 9th because they got so many upgrades. And I think, and this is kind of my early prediction, is what you're going to see, and what we've already seen, is Adeptus Custodes are going to win a lot of RTTs, and they're going to go 4-1 a lot at GTs. But I don't think they're going to win that many events. I feel like they are very poised to be a gatekeeper army, which is unfortunate because they're like my favorite thing in the world. And they can win a GT. It's just the lists we're seeing right now, and maybe someone will find a list that just works better than everything we've seen so far. But there is, they all have a kryptonite, and in a 5-round tournament, they're meeting it. And then, they lose that game. They go 4-1. Their win percentages are very high. They're just as high as Salamanders, but they don't have that T-whip that Salamanders and other Marine factions are putting out, because they can't get to that 5th game before taking a loss.
Because they hit that kryptonite.
They hit that kryptonite, and it depends on the build, right? And that's kind of what happens with skew lists. It's like with Imperial Knights in 8th, they had very good win rates. Their T-whip wasn't terrible. A lot of people played them. Like Custodes are at the same play rate right now as Space Marines, about 12%. So very high. But what we're seeing is just like Imperial Knights, they're like a low to mid table terror, where because they skew so hard in one direction, there's a bunch of lists that just, unless you planned for them, you don't have an answer. But then you go into that one list that's like, well, 2-up armor saves are not a big deal to me. Like with some of these Salamanders lists we're seeing that put out mortal wounds, etc., and they just pick them up and continue about their way.
Very cool. Well, thanks, Peter. We really appreciate the meta update. Hopefully we can get you back here before too long, because I think we're going to start seeing more events popping up, because people are figuring out how to run them now safely. And there's a lot of places in the world where COVID is being tamped down pretty good. So the restrictions are loosening in some places. So
one thing I'll say, boys, if you are going to these events, stay safe, be careful. It's not fixed, but if you can do it as safely as possible, then, you live your life, but just be careful. Be careful. It's not gone.
That's a fact. All right. Thanks, Pete.
No problem. Talk to you later.
Always interesting to get that man's views. Okay, here it comes. It's time for Model of the Week.
It's the model of the day, the model of the day, the model of the day.
Every day during our regular weekday show, we feature a model of the day, and we've been able to show up some stunning work this week. This week's Model of the Week is one you might have already seen. The model we chose for this segment comes from a regular contributor to the Model of the Day, and that's friend of the show, Eric Festa, or Colonel Festus on Instagram. This week, we feature the emo boy himself, Shrike, and wow, does he look cool. The black armor and white accents are both done beautifully, and it's seamlessly blended together. I love the small details like the subtle glow effects from the stabilizer fins, and the fact that it looks like he's got gel in his hair. If you have a model we should feature on the show, or you've seen a model that should be featured on our show, please let us know with our hashtag on Instagram, 40K Today, or toss us a message on Facebook. And that's it for this week. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed getting a peek at the fun stuff we did. A big thanks to our content producer, Alex Boehner, our social media superstar, Tanya Gates, and our technical producer, Seamus Ronan, for all their hard work once again in putting this program together. If you liked what you heard on the show today, make sure you come check us out at 40ktoday.com or on your favorite podcast platform. We do a 15-minute show every day with just the kind of information that was found in today's show. We'll see you next week. Until then, for Paul Murphy and Steve Joel and the rest of the 40K Today team, I'm John Damaris, and that's what's happening in 40K Today.